Well, thanks, Captain Marvel. My continued mistrust and suspicion surrounding cats is further justified thanks to your movie. I'm sorry, I'm not a cat person. Okay, as I like to usually say, first things first, there might be some mild spoilers here. I'll try to withhold, big elements of the plot to some degree, but I gotta discuss certain things, and that might delve into certain elements that some would consider spoilerish. 2, I had the good fortune of not engaging so much with all of the media and all of the controversy surrounding Captain Marvel, the culture wars about this movie and its lead. I'm not going to address any of that. I am kind of over that whole thing thanks to the lessons of Ghostbusters 2016. I'm going to speak earnestly and frankly about the merits of this movie, its weaknesses as a movie, its strengths as a movie, where the narrative works, where it doesn't work, where the performances work, where they don't work, and some other elements. So sorry to disappoint that I'm not going to be one of those hyperbolic ranters and ravers, condemning the movie or condemning the entitled fan base. All right, let's talk about the film. This is Marvel's 21st installment in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, last film that's going to be released before Endgame, and it also serves as an introduction and origin story for Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel. Now, I'm not very familiar with the Captain Marvel stories or legacy overall. I know there have been several Captain Marvels, ranging from Marvel to, I believe, her friend in this movie was Captain Marvel at one point, or Photon, I think. So that being said, as an origin story, as an introduction for Brie Larson's Carol Danvers, does this movie work? Yes, with a few buts. As far as origin stories go and their history in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, origin stories post, I want to say, Guardians of the Galaxy, they weren't as engaging, or they're not as engaging as, say, those first introductory set of movies that established our big core Avenger team. Even though I enjoyed the heck out of Ant-Man as sort of this superhero heist movie, as an origin story, sure, it brought me up to speed on who Ant-Man is and who Scott Lang is sufficiently. Doctor Strange, while I enjoyed the trippy visuals and enjoyed their kind of delving into some more spiritual or holistic or, otherworldly type of realms compared to where they had before, it serves as a very dependable, consistent introduction to the character of Doctor Strange. And Black Panther, I don't really count because he sort of had a makeshift origin and introduction in Civil War. So we go into that movie kind of knowing already what that character's about at that point in his life. He comes to redefine himself as the movie goes on, certainly, but it doesn't serve as the perfunctory origin story that you'd expect. And Spider-Man Homecoming is not even a factor in there. That character, we know his origin backwards and forwards at this point. That was the whole point of that movie. Let's go in, swing in right away without having to go over Spider-Man 101 again. So Captain Marvel here, it definitely is serviceable. It's a very competent, well put together film with regards to its visuals, with regards to set design, and with regards to its performances. For the most part, it is a very kind of through and through, by the numbers Marvel origin movie. It serves as a pretty good introduction to the character of Captain Marvel for any of you who are a novice to Captain Marvel, like me. I got what this character is supposed to be about. I got what the origins of this character, what's entailed in those events. Performance-wise, there are a lot of good moments. There are a lot of good performances and a lot of good dynamics between the characters. I have enjoyed Brie Larson in other things, such as Room, such as her bit part in Don John, where she kind of ruled with just one line of dialogue throughout the entire movie. And like I said, Room is a very kind of transformative type of role for her, and she really hammered that home very well. Here in Captain Marvel, I know what I have gleaned is that a lot of people take issue with her being a little bit more wooden, I guess, in her approach to the character. I can see that based off of just the marketing. It does make sense in the overall story. She plays this character who has been trained and conditioned to be sort of a cold, calculating soldier for the Kree Empire. It makes sense that she's going to be a little detached from people and places around her to that extent, that she's going to be a little bit more militaristic in mindset, perhaps, a little bit more what we consider to be robotic if she is trained and conditioned in such a way. She has moments of levity. Her relationship with Nick Fury, with Samuel L. Jackson, is one of the highlights of the film, I feel. Their back and forths are very good. They do have good chemistry together. Although I will say, I was kind of hoping she wouldn't fall so much to the side of a lot of the characters in the MCU do, which is the kind of default Tony Stark snarkiness. There are some characters who are kind of immune to that, such as Captain America. When it comes to having witty back and forths, I find a lot of the dialogue that happens between characters in these movies tends to emulate so much of what Robert Downey Jr. does in his back and forths with other characters, and that works for Tony Stark. But when you constantly have, say, Hawkeye or Black Widow, or in this case, Captain Marvel, being kind of smart alecky and trying to one-up Nick Fury in the quips department, and he rises to that occasion. I don't know, it's an old hat at this point. So I was kind of hoping for, as much as I liked their chemistry together, I was hoping for some more serious or at least deeper type of discussions between the two than what we did get, but it works. It's, again, like I said, sufficient. Without a doubt, the highlight performance for me in this whole movie was Ben Mendelsohn as the leader of the alien race, the Skrulls. Talos, I believe the character's name is. Ben Mendelsohn you'll know as being that creepy guy in a lot of sci-fi and action movies lately, like Rogue One, Ready Player One, a lot of movies with the word one in their title. But here, when you were expecting him to kind of go into that default Ben Mendelsohn as a creepy villain mode, I did appreciate the aspect of the character that they did shift a little bit. And this actually leads into my talk about the narrative, in that I appreciate that they were trying some new things here in this movie, that it wasn't just a standard stop the villainous villain, in that they're offering degrees and shades of villainy and virtues in all the characters. And that happens halfway through this movie with Ben Mendelsohn's character Talos, when it's revealed what his true motivation is. Even though I had sort of a feeling like maybe they could go this direction, I wasn't 100% sure that that's the route they were going to take until it happened. So I appreciated that they offered a little bit more depth and a little bit more dimension to the motivations of what we constitute as being a Marvel villain, and do it effectively, and actually with some pretty big emotional heft. That plays into the other characters, actually. While a lot of reviews that I have read for this film kind of address or analyze the idea of Carol's search for her true identity and recovering like her life and her memories, and that being kind of the emotional crux of the film. Honestly, the emotional turn for her character, I felt, came at a scene in close to the beginning of the third act, where she and Talos kind of reach a mutual understanding of why they do what they do. And she plays that well, and Ben Mendelsohn plays that very well. And of course, I'll mention Goose the cat. Of course, I mentioned in my opening, cats are sneaky and conniving, and you're not going to change, this movie isn't going to change my thoughts on that otherwise. I'm never going to look at a cat the same way again. And it does amuse me that the most Samuel L. Jackson really comes alive in vivaciousness is when he's interacting with his cat. Overall, across the board, the performances are good. It's what you would expect from a Marvel origin movie. Now, here's where that kind of works against it to some extent, because this is a Marvel origin story, certainly, but it's also trying to be so many other things at the same time that it feels like it loses its balance. And I know this is going to sound like a huge nitpick, but I feel a lot of that made itself more apparent to me with the soundtrack. This takes place in the 90s, and it's got a 90s soundtrack. First of all, you've got all sorts of paraphernalia from the 90s. You see Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness posters all over the place. They remind you how much it sucked to have CD-ROMs load and their loading time. The character mentions that they like to watch Fresh Prince, but it becomes very apparent in the actual soundtrack and in the actual selections of songs for this movie that they had an inkling of what they wanted to communicate with the soundtrack, but went about it in a very kind of, I don't know, I guess I will use the term half-assed way. This soundtrack is comprised of some Nirvana, some No Doubt, some garbage. How about that? I haven't heard I'm Only Happy When It Rains in years, so thank you for that at least, Marvel. But compare this to a movie that relied very strongly on its soundtrack, such as Guardians of the Galaxy, or even Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. There, the soundtrack serves more of a driving purpose in the narrative and character development than it does here, where it feels just more like, remember? Nostalgia, the 90s. In Guardians of the Galaxy, yes, Peter Quill has his awesome mix. He has this cassette tape of songs that we all know from the 70s and 80s, and yeah, sure, it's a nostalgic trip to hear those songs again, but also it informs us about the character and the themes of the movies. Peter Quill, of course, would have that awesome mix comprised of those old songs because he was taken away from Earth in the 80s, and you could argue has been in arrested development in childhood since that time. He's never really matured or grown up. So to have those songs kind of be played throughout his narrative makes sense. It makes sense why there would be sort of this relentless bombardment of those songs from those eras, because not only is it speaking to his mindset and his level of maturity, but also speaking to the reason why those songs are there, which is these were gifts from his mother. This cassette tape was a gift from his mother, and then she gave him another cassette tape for Volume 2, and the songs chosen in there further inform what the characters go through. The fact that the last song in the movie is Father and Son by Cat Stevens, it speaks to the theme of that film in its entirety. So you have these soundtracks for these particular films with Guardians of the Galaxy that, you know, these are deliberate choices to inform what our characters are going through, why we respond the way we do to the events that transpire around them. Here in Captain Marvel, I get that that might be what they're going for, a similar vibe, that these songs are supposed to inform us of her journey, but they either are way too overt about it, or it's sometimes very misplaced. I'll give you two examples here. There's a certain point where Captain Marvel is sort of trapped in her own mind. She has sort of a showdown with this artificial intelligence. They kind of debate back and forth in her mindscape. And in her mindscape, they're playing Come As You Are by Nirvana. I kind of immediately felt something off with this as soon as I heard the song choice, because this takes place in 1995. 6 years prior, spoilers I guess, Carol was, for all intents and purposes, abducted by the Kree and given their powers due to an accident that sort of imbued her with sort of their photon energy. And that for 6 years she's been living in the Kree Empire, training as a Kree warrior, and then only recently came back to Earth. 6 years from 1995, 1989. Come As You Are wasn't released until 1991. So that kind of immediately set off a little bell for me, being like, why would Carol have this song playing in her mind when she was not around to kind of absorb an initial listening of it, when she would not be even aware of the song Come As You Are? And then I kind of realized, like, oh, it's because this is in the 90s. What's more 90s than Nirvana? So the filmmakers just wanted to put in a song that sort of spoke to the theme of becoming as you are, because the theme of identity plays a little bit throughout this film, but it needs to be from the 90s. Whatever connection it has with Carol, none. And so that really kind of made me go, huh, interesting choice, because I automatically recognized, like, she would not know anything about this song. And I know that seems like a bit of a nitpick. I get it. But I feel it speaks to more of a symptomatic idea that's taking place throughout this entire movie, which is it knows what it wants to do because it's been done successfully in the other Marvel origin stories, but it doesn't really go about executing those ideas as effectively as it did in, say, a Doctor Strange or an Ant-Man. Another example would be there's this fight scene in the third act, which finally demonstrates, like, all of Carol's abilities at their full potential. And it's no doubt, it's I'm Just a Girl. That's a little too on the nose, if you ask me. I would have preferred some of the actual original score they came up with for the film. It's actually a really good score that mixes some elements from, you know, Thor Ragnarok with its electronica kind of synth vibe, with some very dramatic, heroic sounding motifs. But again, it was this idea of, it knows it wants to kind of maybe have a lighthearted tone like Guardians of the Galaxy, so let's put this pop song from this time period in here and speak to the effect that she's just a girl, and yeah, she's kicking ass, sure, but let's hammer it home all the more so. When you have that kind of imbalance taking place with the fact that at the other end of the spectrum in this film is this struggle for identity, is sort of this darker storyline taking place, not just about Carol, but about the narrative she's been fed during this 6-year period, about the things that she's been conditioned to believe about the Kree and the Skrulls, then it's sort of, I don't know, it feels like it sort of canceled out its own tone from time to time. It wants to be that lighthearted frolic that Guardians of the Galaxy was. It wants to be that trippy visual feast that Doctor Strange was. It wants to be, at times, this low-tech kind of espionage type of film that either Ant-Man in its more heist-oriented moments or Captain America the Winter Soldier were. It wants to be the fish out of water story like the first Thor film. It never really gives Carol as a character an opportunity to kind of forge her own kind of pathway. I like the characterization of Carol Danvers, and I think Brie Larson was doing a great job with the material that she was given. It's just that this character's story arc, I felt, needed to be beefed up a little bit more. The idea for struggling with identity is played with, but she comes to a resolution about that whole struggle pretty quickly. At no point do we ever see her really truly ever wrestling with her dual identity between being human or being Kree. And when it does come to the forefront, it's being explained to us why the struggle is important. And not even by Carol, but by the characters surrounding her, by her best friend from Earth, by, not Monica, Monica's the daughter, I forget the name, Maria Rambeau? I know Monica Rambeau is who Photon eventually will be, but Maria Rambeau, her Air Force buddy, is the one who tells us why we should invest in Carol Danvers' strengths as a character, as opposed to us kind of discovering that, I don't know, visually, like a movie should. That's one thing that kind of came into play, is throughout the film I was kind of at times questioning, like, what is this movie wanting to say about its main character? Is this a turning point for this character, and are we supposed to be feeling the gravity of that situation? Is it about something that Spider-Verse talked about a couple months before, never giving up? There's a whole montage of her throughout different stages of her life getting up from tragedy, getting up from struggle, always finding a way to get back up. That's an idea that's played with for a total of like 30 seconds. So while it serves as a good enough origin story to get you caught up to speed as to who Captain Marvel is, I'm not entirely sure like how to feel about what directions they could take the character from here on out. I'm not gonna put too fine a point on it, but you know, she is gonna play a pretty important part in April in Endgame. That's no secret. I'm curious to see what the Russos do with her as a character, where they're able to integrate her into the story there, because I still, while I enjoy the performance of the character here, I still don't have a firm kind of grasp on how I should feel about Captain Marvel and what she's all about, because we're never really given too much of an idea specifically what she's about, other than a broad general like she's the hero statement. Also, I feel another component that plays against this movie is its placement, not in the MCU timeline overall, but its placement in the release dates. This is coming out a month before Avengers Endgame. That feels very, very kind of brisk, an introduction to Captain Marvel before we're gonna see her again. And I know they kind of did it with Black Panther as well, where they had his solo film, and then a few months later came Infinity War. But Black Panther, like I said, didn't really need a by-the-numbers origin story to set up who he was, because we'd seen some of his development in Captain America Civil War. They interlaced him throughout the narrative and throughout this overall MCU storyline, so by the time Infinity War came around, we were caught up to speed as to how we should feel about T'Challa. You know, aside from a little Easter egg in Infinity War, we haven't been given much of an inside look as to not just the motivation of Captain Marvel, but the motivation of where she comes from with regards to the Kree. They've always been kind of background characters in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. You even have a couple of GOTG alums show up in supporting roles here. So, I don't know, part of me was feeling like we should have had an introduction to Carol at least around the time of Age of Ultron. Like, we should have had this story be told to us a few years ago. So that way we're given some time to kind of absorb and maybe even get a little bit more insight as to what is driving Carol Danvers in this particular version. Because as it stands, she's going to show up in Endgame between 1995 and modern day. Quite a bit of time has passed. Like I said, it's a very delicate balancing act that this movie is on. It didn't necessarily take away from my enjoyment of the film overall. It is still very entertaining. It's got some laughs. It's got some good visuals. I saw it in 3D. And while I felt the 3D wasn't really necessary for a majority of the film, it really does pop when you're given those space battle sequences, when you're given time to see her train on the Kree homeworld, when you're given her kind of in her full-on energy glow effect. It does look pretty good. And the effects, I like the Skrulls for the most part when they aren't doing their shape-shifting thing. They are very practical effects with just makeup and very convincing prosthetics. Like I said, I like kind of the turn they took with regards to the villainous side of the story. And there's things to enjoy, performances to enjoy here. It does very much serve as a fair enough introduction to the character of Captain Marvel, but that's about it. It kind of does the bare minimum with regards to its requirements without exceeding expectations for the character or kind of becoming a little bit more transformative or transcending what's been done before in other Marvel origin movies. I'm really curious to see what they can do with a character who's got so little time to develop between now and her next big appearance in a month from now. So I hope that works, and I hope I avoided all those controversies and talking points that erupted throughout the media about this movie being a detriment to, I don't know, the pristine, untouchable glory that is the MCU. It's just frivolous entertainment, people. Fictional characters.